Welcome to A Place for Film, the IU Cinema podcast. On this week's episode, we're talking about the City Lights series. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. My name is Andy Hunsucker.
And I'm Jason Thompson.
And on this week's episode, we've got the programmers of the City Lights series and eagle-eyed viewers, Jason, who are familiar with the City Lights series and our show, will notice that they have changed drastically.
They have, yes.
Very different. For the past, since we started this show, it's been two guys, James Pasca and Landon Palmer, who have done the City Lights series, and they've handed the baton to a new group.
That's right.
So we've got Noelle Griffis and Danny Grinberg, who are now programming the series. You guys are both CMCL grads. Thanks for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So Jason, the City Lights series looks really interesting this semester, and I didn't know that they had changed programmers when I looked at the original list, and I was like, this does not seem like the past City Lights series.
That's kind of what I was thinking. I was wondering if they sort of tried to apply it, because, you know, they had a sort of certain theme.
Yeah.
We always talked about that. Like one time it was really dark, and then one time it was really light.
Yeah.
And then this just didn't seem like sort of following any sort of path whatsoever. So now it makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Totally different people. So we will discuss that with them a little bit later on in the show. Okay, so let's talk about the City Lights series. And we should note there is one additional person who programmed that is not here because we don't have room for extra people in the studio. So tell us about the third person. Let's give him some credit.
Yeah, we have Jason Qualls, who is also film and media, CMCL. And we put him on 40s and the 50s, I think. He does a lot of melodrama work. So he has Bad and the Beautiful and Out of the Past are his two selections.
Well, let's talk about, first of all, because every podcast is someone's very first podcast, let's talk about what is the City Lights series and why are you guys lucky enough to get to program it?
Okay. Do you want to field that or should I?
Do you want to start?
Sure. So we had a gentleman named David Bradley who donated somewhere between 3,500 and 4,000 films, I believe, to Indiana University. And you had a wealth of titles spanning from the 20s to the 80s. And someone, I'm not sure who actually originally had the idea of creating the City Lights Festival. Do you? Was it James?
I don't know.
We'll have to research that.
I know it predates the IU Cinema, so they were doing a screening series elsewhere in a classroom or something.
Some genius that we will look into decided that we should show off some of these great films to the larger community, and the City Lights series was created to pull films from that collection and to exhibit them.
All right.
Yeah, and then so Landon and James have been doing that, and then they decided it was time to let some other people do some programming in the department, so it has been put on our shoulders.
Now, did you guys have to wrestle them for that? Because I imagine it wasn't easy to give up that sort of responsibility.
I definitely chose to arm wrestle Landon and not James because I felt like that was more of a fair fight.
Yeah.
And it was a tough battle, but I ended up winning and I ended up succeeding him. So
good. Yeah. Good. So whenever we have James and Landon on, they talk about sort of their theory behind how they program this series. Now, they have some ground rules. Do you guys have any ground rules about what films, how you sort of narrow down the list? Like they had a rule that, one film per decade and stuff like that. Do you guys, what kind of rules did you guys set for yourselves?
We stuck with the one film per decade rule, and that's pretty much the only rule we had. And then since we had three people, we sort of almost by default each took a couple of decades and programmed from that. And since it was our first time, we just wanted to kind of select favorites from the collection and, just what we'd want to see on screen.
And we tried to find a kind of a balance, but also diversity in the films that we chose. We didn't want to have anything too thematic going on, whereas we wanted to showcase really a wide variety of films. I specifically chose High and Low because we didn't have any East Asian films in the City Lights series before. And then I also wanted to show a musical because there weren't any other musicals that anyone else had chosen. So we kind of also tried to think of things that the other people hadn't chosen yet and try to find kind of a range that we could showcase.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about these films, and we'll go just by chronological order, not by order of film date, but by order that they're coming up. So the first one listed here, coming up on Saturday, January 26th at 3 p.m., Le Million. What can you tell me about Le Million?
I can tell you a lot. It was the one that I chose. I was really, really eager. I said, no matter what, I have to show this film. I love it. It's part of the Criterion Collection. That's where I first discovered it. Came out in 1931, directed by René Clair. And at the time, it was an international sensation. And it really changed film cinema, but I feel like film history. And subsequently, it kind of got lost to time, and people don't really recognize it as the milestone it is. And I think it's a great film. I've seen it countless times. I'd say at least 15. And it's really important, I think, historically, because it's kind of at the cusp of when sound was becoming used. It came out in 1931. René Clair was still really skeptical about sound technology. So you're seeing this film kind of at the turning point of when sound became more prevalent. And beyond that, beyond the historical reasons, I think it's just an amazing film. It's really exuberant. The songs are really fun. The characters are fun. The choreography and all the action is really captivating. So it's just a really great time. You don't notice that the movie's over because it just feels really effortless and fun and easy.
So this is the musical?
This is the musical, yeah.
Excellent. I really enjoy musicals, so I'm glad that you guys got to throw a musical in there. I'm not familiar with René Clair. What other kind of stuff has he done?
Well, he was one of the first people to write his own films, direct, edit, produce. So he was really, really powerful at the time in the 20s and the 30s. And the first sound film that he did that's also considered pretty important was Under the Roofs of Paris, and that was also a musical. And that came out, I believe, in 1929. And just after Le Million, in the same year, in 1931, he also made À nous la liberté, which was what's the best way to put this? I guess we'll say chief influence on modern times. His producers actually ended up suing Chaplin because they said that he copied À nous la liberté to a degree that they didn't find comfortable, but Clair said that he wasn't going to take any part in it because he himself had been influenced by Chaplin before. But those are kind of the three big films. And then after that, Clair was wooed to Hollywood, where he made movies in English, including I Married a Witch with Veronica Lake.
I started watching that film. I didn't get very far in it, but
I'll be honest,
it just sounded so fascinating.
It's not very good.
Yeah.
But I think it was pretty much the influence behind Bewitched, so it might have been kind of important for that sense, but I don't think it's a great film.
Important. Yeah. All right, so the next film listed here is Out of the Past, and that's coming up on Saturday, February 2nd at 3 p.m. I'm familiar with the title of this film, but what can you tell me about it?
Well, this is the one that actually we all sort of came up with a list and came together, and we all had this one on our list.
Interesting.
So this was the unanimous decision, and luckily Jason went ahead and kept it as his spot. But it's really one of the great film noirs. It's, I think I saw him as much younger, and immediately Robert Mitchum became my favorite movie star. Mm-hmm. He's just got such an interesting kind of he's just got a great presence that's kind of brusque and very masculine, I guess. And in that film noir sense, it's got a fantastic, it's got the Jane Greer's a really amazing femme fatale. Mm-hmm. Jacques Tourneur, 1947. But it's just about a man who's really tried to leave this man behind, and it comes back for him and sucks him back in.
Yeah. Very cool.
And I think if someone had never seen a film noir and they wanted to see this really classic example, I think Out of the Past would be a great choice because it really does embody all the things we think of with a film noir.
Yeah. The next one here listed is The Bad and the Beautiful. And this one's coming up on Saturday, March 2nd at 3 p.m. What can you guys tell me about The Bad and the Beautiful?
I can't tell you very much because that was Jason's pick, so I'll defer to you.
Yeah. Okay. I watched it the other night. Actually, I hadn't seen it yet.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
So I was excited about his choice, and I kind of wanted to see it for the first time on the big screen, but thought I should watch it for the show.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So it's
you're preaching to the choir. We have to do that a lot.
I know. I kind of wanted to wait to see all of them again, even the ones I was repeating. But I was like,
exactly.
I'll see them. So it's 1952, and it's Vincent Minnelli, and I'm fairly certain that John's scheduling it the same week as they're showing An American in Paris.
Okay.
With I think one of the digital restorations.
Mm-hmm.
So there'll be sort of a Minnelli week. So there was
Interesting.
some planning there. But it's a Hollywood movie about Hollywood. There's a producer's calls in a screenwriter, a director, and Lana Turner is the movie star to come in, and they want him to work again with this producer that sort of made all the careers, but in a very treacherous sort of way. He made them and then he sort of left them high and dry, although they all went on to be great stars. So it's sort of this triptych story that they all talk about. And it's interesting because it has elements of melodrama. Sort of each of the sections has melodramatic component to it. But the way that it's sort of all pieced together is a little more, I think, unconventional. And it's sort of a creative way that it's been done. It's a really interesting film that I just saw and really enjoyed. I'm glad to see it again
Yeah.
soon.
Excellent. Now, the next one I am familiar with. I haven't seen it yet. This is one of those films, Jason, you'll shake your head, but I've had it sitting on my shelf.
I hope it's not High and Low.
Yes.
Oh, no.
Yes. I've had it sitting on my shelf for about probably a year now. I'm a huge Kurosawa fan. Now, the cinemas actually had a lot of the Kurosawa samurai films,
Right.
feudal Japan films at the cinema. The whole President's Choice series a year ago was Kurosawa in that vein. And then we had one film the previous semester. I can't remember which ones were which, but we had
that was Kagamusha. Or
Kagamusha, yeah. Kagamusha was the one from the previous semester. We haven't had any of Kurosawa's films set in like modern day Japan. So this one, again, I haven't seen it yet, but I'm familiar with it. It's almost like a kidnapping plot.
It is.
Tell me more about it.
Okay. Well, after talking about The Imposter, now I feel like I'm the kidnapping fanatic. But this is another really powerful movie about a child being kidnapped. You have a business executive who believes that his son was kidnapped because his son was the target, but it's actually his chauffeur's son that gets kidnapped. And then he has to make this decision, well, am I still going to give up the ransom for my chauffeur's son? And so you have that kind of really pivotal ethical dilemma going on. But then when you think that's kind of the crux of the movie, it changes gears and it becomes also about the criminal who kidnapped the son. It becomes about this really deep divide between the rich and poor in modern-day Japan. You also have kind of the fact of the 60s in Japan because it was made in 1963. So it has all these really interesting elements going on. It has this police procedural element, and there's just so many different factors that are all woven really expertly into this one film. And that is actually what you were talking about. The reason that I chose this film is I feel like when people think of Kurosawa, they think of these really feudal movies like Ran and Throne of Blood and Yojimbo, which are great movies and I love. But High and Low is actually my favorite Kurosawa. And I wanted to show this more modern side of him that I also think he does really well in movies like Dodeskaden and Ikuru that aren't shown as often.
Yeah. Yeah, and, I'm very familiar with his feudal work. I am not at all familiar with his sort of modern Japan work. I need to catch up, and this is a good example. And Toshiro Mifune. You cannot go wrong
He's
when
excellent
Mifune's
in
on
the movie.
screen.
Yeah.
I did the poster for the last Kurosawa series, and you just put Mifune's face on there, and you're done. It's like that's all you have to do. He does all the work for you.
I think it might be the best actor-director pairing maybe in film history.
Yeah, I would agree. The next film listed here, coming on Saturday, March 30th, is one that I'm not familiar with at all. It's called The Docks of New York. What can you tell me about The Docks of New York?
So this one's 1928, von Sternberg. So it's right after Underworld. So this is the end of his silent period. And a lot of people say this is sort of his silent masterpiece. It has very atmospheric cinematography. The whole thing looks like it's on a dock, so it looks like it's under fog. And it's Harold Rosen, who is the cinematographer for Wizard of Oz later. So Mae Compson she was, I guess, very prolific in the teens, and I guess this is sort of maybe around her peak or something. But she's a showgirl or dance hall queen, which generally, which means prostitute in the film, of course.
Exactly.
It's actually pretty clear in the film.
Yeah.
They don't really
Yeah. Well,
hide it
this
that
is-
much in the late 20s.
This is 28, so it's pre-code.
Yeah,
so,
pre-code, so
yeah,
it's-
they wouldn't have cared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's pretty. It's a little saucy in that regard, and it begins with her throwing herself into the water and being rescued by a very brute roughneck. He's a ship stoker, which he's the guy who like throws the coal in the fire. And they have sort of a turgid, melodramatic love affair, but it's really beautiful, and it's just it's kind of one of those just silent masterpieces that just show you what you can do
Yeah.
with faces and fog and lights.
Exactly. And this one, the City Lights series usually includes a silent film with live accompaniment. This is the film.
Yes.
Philip Carley's coming back. Philip Carley's done a lot of these films, so always excited to see him do his work. The last film listed here is one that I'm very familiar with because I have seen this one. This one has been at the cinema before, though, as I mentioned last week, it was not a public screening. I was lucky enough to get to go see this with Peter Bogdanovich.
Wow.
Peter Bogdanovich warned me about name dropping, but
He never does that.
yeah, exactly. So the Last Picture Show, which is not his first film, but I would say probably his best. I don't know. You could make some arguments, but this was like the film where he really became Peter Bogdanovich, and people knew who he was. So tell me, why is this one on the list?
This was another pretty close to unanimous decision. I think it's just a favorite. It's definitely one of my favorite films. I love Paper Moon, but I would say it's still my favorite Bogdanovich
Yeah.
from the Larry McMurtry novel. And it's just, I think it's one of the most interesting sort of coming of age sexual stories, because it's not just about coming of age, but it's just about aging in general. And I mean, the performances, it's really, it introduces Sybil Shepherd and Randy Quaid, but it's also Jeff Bridges, I think his first film role. He had sort of a TV career before that. And Ellen Burstyn and Cloris Leachman. I mean, they're so phenomenal. So I watched that one again the other night, and I'm like, this one I don't mind watching over and over and over to talk about. So
Exactly.
And I also suggested it for selfish reasons and that I'd never seen on the big screen. And
Yeah.
I think
Right.
other people haven't. So just giving
Yeah.
people that opportunity is a
Exactly.
great chance.
Well, and I mentioned this last week when we watched Last Picture Show. Peter Bogdanovich was there in the audience for the cinema dedication, and he came up on stage afterward and specifically said that it had looked on the cinema screen better than it had ever looked in the entire time he had been working on it. So yeah, this is going to be an experience. This is on Saturday, April 27th at 3 p.m. And just an exceptional film. And it's almost sort of like it's that early 70s sort of thing where it's like they're trying out new things. It's not the standard storytelling method. You're sort of jumping around a little bit, but you're keeping up with it because the characters are so well drawn.
right. Well, he said it's interesting. To me, it's kind of the most interesting film of talking about sort of new and old Hollywood, because he is so heavily outward. He's written about John Ford and all these people at this time, so he's such a fan of old Hollywood, Hollywood in quotes. But he's also doing these more sexually provocative things, and the way they're talking to each other has a little bit of like Cassavetes style of. You kind of have to strain to hear all the dialogue at the beginning until you get used to it. So it definitely has both.
But I do find it fascinating because it is like somebody shot this in the 50s and they just didn't have to worry about the code. Like, let's just make a movie however we want, and we're not doing it in a salacious way. We're not doing it, to sort of like put in the seedy movie houses. We're doing it because this is the story we want to tell and this is the way we want it to be. So you watch it, and I would totally believe that you could just totally buy that it was a film made in 1955.
Definitely.
But yeah, it's just such a great movie.
It's actually the same DP as Bad and the Beautiful. I just discovered is doing a little research for this. So yeah, it still draws on the same actual people who are making the 50s films.
So what do you guys feel about the overall tone? Landon and James always talk to us about the tone of the series, what they were trying to accomplish overall. Did you guys feel like you had a sense of that, or was it just like you just got to pick the films you want and hope, that will you worry about that after the fact as it's going on? Will you be sitting in the audience like, oh man, this is like the third downer in a row, or no, it's just too fluffy and light?
I don't think it'll be too fluffy and light.
No. One thing we unintentionally discovered was that all 6 of our films were in black and white, which was just kind of a happy accident. But This is the black and white series.
Yeah.
Right.
But as you have black and white, I think you have 2 pretty polar colors. And I think our series is also, we're jumping between nations, we're jumping between decades, we're jumping between moods. So I think if anything, it's probably just range is what we're showcasing. We're not showing you one movie through 6 different decades. We're showing you really different movies. And I invite everyone who's listening to come to all 6 and try to find a theme that you think ties them all together. We would love that, but it wasn't our intention.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about your guys' interests in academics. Sorry, not Jason. That's Jason. You're Danny.
Yes.
You said you were interested in documentaries. What sorts of things are you working on?
Well, right now I'm focusing on war documentaries, specifically Vietnam War documentaries. I'm writing about a film from 1972 called Winter Soldier, which was about Vietnam War veterans testifying to the atrocities they committed. And I'm specifically looking at memory in the film, both the memories of the soldiers themselves and then cultural memory, the way that the film couldn't find any theatrical distribution at the time. It wasn't theatrically released until 2005. And when we were embroiled in the Iraq War and people started comparing Iraq to Vietnam. So I'm talking about repressed memories and traumatic memories, post-traumatic stress disorder, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also interested in things like French cinema. I'm interested in East Asian cinema. And I'm also interested in space and film, different ways that spaces are used.
Sounds like he and I would get along pretty well.
Yeah.
So
you're big on the documentaries and
French films. I'm all about. So
yeah.
Well, if your friends don't want to watch those movies, just invite me.
Exactly. See, there you go. There you go.
Noelle, what are your academic interests?
Yeah, my focus is, I guess I'm definitely an Americanist. So American films from the late 60s, early 70s. Particularly, my focus is films shot on location in New York, looking at when they sort of started, when the mayor's office for film was called Film Coordination at the time. Now the film, TV, and broadcast sort of started up and tried to make New York the film city and lure the films away from Hollywood. And of course, this is the era where the city's kind of in crisis, and filmmakers were eager to make, the more popular ones we know about are sort of the Mean Streets and Midnight Cowboys and things like that, that all come about. It's not really
glorifying New York City.
It's not. No, it's interesting because the city is looking really rough, and they're making it look as rough as possible and looking for the worst parts. But it's still financially very good for the city, and it was financially good for Hollywood. And they're in a rough period, but at the same time, these kind of urban, gritty dramas are pretty popular. Blaxploitation is really popular, so all these films are being made in the city. And it all looks pretty rough, but it's kind of working out for everyone. So there's a lot of interesting stories there. I'm sort of interested in the spatial aspects and how the filmmakers are taking it sort of, not advantage, but sort of advantage of both sort of what's going on politically and socially in the city as well, and how that's really interacting with actual people on the streets when these films are all being shot on their streets and on their stoops and in their neighborhoods.
It reminds me of something John Sayles said when he was here, when he was shooting what was that Alien movie he did where the guy came down?
Oh, yeah, that was great.
And he was talking, I can't remember the name of the film, it drives me nuts, but he was talking, Joe Morton is in it, and he's talking about how the people in New York were his extras. Right. And you see it in the film, like he's just walking around the camera and people like stop and like turn and look at the camera. But it works because...
Is it Brother from Another Planet?
Brother from Another Planet.
Yeah.
Brother from Another Planet, that's the film. But it so works because there's this guy who's supposed to be an alien, and he doesn't look any different from anyone else, but everyone's just sort of staring at him. And the reason they're staring at him is because there's this whole camera crew pointed at him. But it totally works for the film because you see these people walk by and like turn around and look at this guy like he's crazy and then like, like wave, and it's like what's going on? But it's just one of those things that it really works for that. But are you interested in like the independent stuff, like the underground stuff, or is it just sort of the more Hollywood, the more professional productions?
Yeah, I mean, I've been focusing a little bit on Hollywood right now, but my ultimate goal is to sort of look at, there sort of was this film culture already in New York that was the underground. And they were calling it the New American Cinema, which then Hollywood starts calling its thing the New American Cinema. So I'm interested in sort of how those clash but work together, knew each other. They're in the same space and they're watching the same films, and some of them are getting to know each other. So those relationships are really interesting to me. And also there's a lot of, student activist filmmaking that's starting up, and even kind of video movement in the scene. So it's, all of these things happening at one time in New York is really what I'm interested in looking into.
Cool. Well, I think we'll get out of here, Jason. So Noelle and Danny, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing what you guys do next. Are you guys sticking around for next semester? You're gonna hold on to the
very, very tightly.
yeah.
We're gonna hold on to the reins. Yeah.
Yes, good. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us, and we'll get out of here.
Yeah.
So I'm Andy.
I'm Jason.
This has been, and always will be, A Place for Film. A Place for Film is recorded at WFIU Studios in Bloomington, Indiana.